and talk about future research based on some of the ideas here. So the first is that we are looking at security mechanisms without secrets here. So we want to simplify provably complex crypto protocols and problems by using safe social, policy, physical accountability, and trust relations that exist in the environment that we haven't tapped yet. We want to simplify bootstrapping of security properties without secrets. We want to do what Adrian calls software attestation, which bootstraps security properties without secrets in your processor, without a TPM. Right? So that's an alternative to the TPM for devices that cannot afford the TPM and environments that where you need to bootstrap security without TPMs. We want to understand and discover online deception and scams. So there is some initial work done by Stein and Wilson where they looked at the British BBC series called Real Hustle, and they analyzed the scenarios of scams, and they drew some conclusions, but their conclusions, while great, they are not actionable. So my bet is that all those, or a majority of those scams, do have embedded in them interactive trust protocols with failed safety conditions, with failed reduction of asymmetry. So that's one area where we'd like to do some exploration. We want to explore machine learning techniques for safety detection in these interactive trust protocols, not in intrusion detection, but safety in interaction trust protocols. And we want to look at trust networks, explore this notion of social collateral in networks of humans for deterrence and recovery. And by the way, this last area is reasonably well researched in behavioral economics. They do have some interesting models which I claim apply more to computers, networks of computers than networks of humans.
So we've continued to work on this, and our latest incarnation is, as I said, Unleashing Mayhem on Binary Code, where we've demonstrated that we can automatically generate exploits given only the program binary. So I want to give you a video of what this looks like. So I'm showing you here the source code for a program called iwconfig. And you can see here there's a standard buffer overflow where we copy user input into a 32-byte buffer. So of course, if you run this program with more than 32 bytes of input, bad things can occur. Now this is a moderately sized program. It's about the same size as most Unix utilities at 1,400 lines of code. It's by no means exceptionally large. And what we want to be able to do is take an off-the-shelf binary, shown here it's a strip binary, no symbol table or anything, and run a single command line here called Mayhem that systematically explores this program, finds bugs, and when it finds bugs, tries to generate exploits. And in this case, it says that exploit generation succeeded. And in fact, it's cut off a little bit. But in 8 seconds, we outputted this input to the program. And the interesting thing about this input is if you give it to the program as the first argument, you get a root shell. So in 8 seconds, we went from having just a binary program that we knew nothing about to automatically generating an exploit. A world in which this is possible is far different than the world we live in today, where we have to go and find the Robert Morrises of the world to analyze software. And of course, there's obvious offensive implications to these sort of tools. But there's also a significant number of defensive implications. In fact, I think the defensive implications outweigh the offense. For example, Ubuntu Linux has 99,000 open bugs. Ubuntu Linux, 99,000. Many critical systems run on Linux. Everything from SCADA systems to the tanks in the military run on Linux. If we can go and we can automatically prioritize which of those 99,000 bugs are most serious, we can fix them first. So our research program consists of 3 fundamental thrusts. First, we want to formalize what it means to exploit a system with mathematical precision. Currently, because it's a manual process, people just kind of say things and expect you to know what they mean. So we're formalizing these with mathematical precision. We've done this with 2 important types of vulnerabilities, buffer overflows and format strings. There are other important types of vulnerabilities that we're working on, but those 2 we have, I think, under wraps. Now, the reason we want to formalize these is we want to bring to bear automatic program verification techniques. We want to be able to, as my calculus teacher used to say, do plug and chug, where once we have property that we want to check. We want to check to see whether programs have this property. And finally, the most important thing to me is to have our techniques work on real code. We have demonstrated our techniques on Ubuntu Linux and Windows 7. Now, the first two things are really all that's necessary for me to keep my job. I can publish a paper if I formalize an exploit, do binary program verification, and demonstrate 3 programs that are exploitable. But we're moving beyond that. We want to verify every program. So these are, I think, 28 programs that we've looked at, and we've been able to automatically find the bugs and generate exploits for.
So then we show them a survey, and first we ask them, were you able to play the game? And they say yes, and we ask them to describe it, and this person said, well, it was a game about a buggy on Mars. Have you ever played the game before? No. Do you think it was fun? Yes. Okay. Then we asked them a bunch of other questions about the game. These really are decoy questions, but it lots of questions about the game. Do you think it would be fun for 12-year-olds? Whatever. Then we asked them to evaluate another game. So this time they have to evaluate the Tom and Jerry refrigerator raid game. And here they go and they move around this cat and mouse, and they get points, and then they go and they evaluate it again. And this time they say it's a boring game about Tom and Jerry, maybe fun for kids. And they answer more questions about the game. Now they come back, they get their third game. Okay, this time they're going to go to yourgamefactory.net. They click on the link, they go there, and they're ready to play the game, only this time it says that the game requires the latest version of Microsoft Silverlight. And they see the spinning wheel, and they're waiting for that latest version of Microsoft Silverlight to download. A little while later, this pop-up appears in their web browser. Do you allow the following program to make changes to this computer? And it asks them to type in their username and password. So they go ahead and they type in their username and password and expect to play the game. At this point, we tell them that sadly the game is no longer available and they don't get to play the game. And so then they come back to the survey and we ask them, were you able to play the game? And this time they say no. And we asked them, well, why not? And they said, it asked me to install Silverlight, but it never finished the install in my machine. Then we start asking them some more questions that are really what we're interested in. As I said, the whole game thing was a ruse here. First thing we asked them is whether they actually entered, they had any requests to enter their password. And of course, they're all going to say yes. And we asked them what website requested your password. This person says Silverlight. We got a lot of interesting answers there. We also informed them that we had, in fact, captured their password, and we wanted to find out whether the password they entered was really their password or whether they was trying to fake the system out. And so we asked them that. We also asked them some questions to try to figure out whether they realized that this password entry box was actually fake. And so we tell them, hey, this was actually fake. Were you suspicious? They can tell us why they were suspicious or not.
So when using the application, we generate a long-term public-private key pair for you, encrypted and stored at rest with your passphrase that you choose. First thing you're going to do with another user is exchange your data. Now you have your public key represented here, and the push token that we use to address to each phone. You can choose whichever personal data you want to share. Begin the exchange, and now each user will attest 3 things out of band. One is the number of users that are in the exchange. At this point, 2 to 10 is what we support. We're delivered that low entropy ID. We compare out of band. We're asked people to choose the lowest as the common one. Then we, of course, transform all of our delivered data into a consistent hash of 3 words, 24 bits of information. We also have 2 decoy phrases there because we don't want people just to go through and not actually verify and compare with other people. So you actually have to choose. These other decoy phrases are deterministic, so they do not, they should not appear, no other decoy should appear on any other user's phone while you're in that exchange. So it's a little less confusing. And at the end, we see that, finally see the public or the private information that we share that we can decrypt from Mad Hatter and White Rabbit. And then at that point, we have those keys in our little internal database, and we can share some messages. We can encrypt a little text message and send it, receive them. We can read our messages. We can add an attachment, encrypt that as well, and send it along. One of the exciting things that we just released in SafeSlinger 1.5 is this idea of doing a secure introduction. So it's extending a one-hop trust. So I have my personal database of my keys, as well as the exchanged keys that I have that I trust, and now I can pick two of those keys and exchange the public key information in an encrypted message to two other parties that I want to introduce.
So this is the clickjacking attack. And of course, clickjacking has been known for a while, but I presented some new variants on the clickjacking attack that had never been presented before anywhere in the world. And over the course of the last year, we started talking to other researchers about this, and we found that really these attacks were quite effective at abusing some of the new features that were being added to browsers, such as access to the camera. So let me just review some of the things that we talked about at last year's CyLab partner meeting. And then I'll talk about the defense that we proposed and is being adopted by browser vendors. So let's say that you're an attacker and you want to access the user's webcam. So in order to get the webcam authorized, you need to convince the user to click on an authorize dialog. And so there's actually an authorized dialog on the screen. Can anybody see it? It's on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. That's not actually an advertisement. It's a flash message. So if the user is browsing around the web and they see something like this, they probably aren't that interested in watching an advertisement, and so they're probably going to click on the skip the ad link in order to move on to the next page of the website. So they're going to be moving their mouse, and we're talking about the desktop attack right now. They're going to be moving their mouse to the skip this ad link, and then they're going to click on it in order to move on to the content that they want to see. But there's a problem. This website has actually hidden the true mouse cursor. You can't see your own cursor. They're using a custom invisible cursor. And what you're moving is actually, what you're seeing moving on the screen is actually a bitmap that's been drawn on the screen by the website. And so while you think your mouse cursor is actually on the skip button, there's a secondary cursor which you can just barely see, which is over the allow button on the flash dialog. So what you've actually done is you've enabled webcam access even though you thought you were clicking on the button to skip the ad. So this is an attack that we discovered, and we ran a study with Amazon Mechanical Turk where we found that about 43% of users that were presented with this ad attempted to skip it and turn on their webcam.
These are the data breaches distribution. We had about more than 200 data breaches in our data over the 3 or 4 years period. And then, some of them are just carelessness on the part of hospitals. Some of maybe explicit attacks or malware and hacking from outside. Some are just insider threats. So you can kind of classify them in different ways. We also have the size of the breach, so we know how many records were breached. We also know severity in terms of whether personal information was breached versus just not personal information was breached, so we can do all of that. Let me skip this part. Let me just show you some basic results. All this suggests is higher the HHI, which is less the competition, less is the chances of breach. That is, the hospitals which are in the more monopoly market actually seem to be protecting our data better than the hospitals in a more competitive market. Now, one may worry that is it just the region size effect going on? That is, Philadelphia is a big market, so there are more hospitals and there are more breaches. Is that what you're picking up? That's not true because we control for the size of the population. That is how big the Philadelphia region is, income, education level, so on and so forth. If Pennsylvania has different laws compared to California, we control for Pennsylvania state dummy, so on and so forth. So many robustness checks consistently tell you at least that the correlation seems to be very clear. The more the competition, more the data breaches, not the fewer the data breaches. So that's a little bit of a surprise, actually, when we looked at it. We tried to look at on a severity, that is the size of the data breach. So we said, how many records are breached? Because not each breach is exactly the same. Even then, you basically get consistent result, more the competition, more the data breaches. We split the data based on was there a personal information breach versus not personal information, and you consistently get this result, which is more competition means more data breaches.
One of the things that we found over the years is that not only do we need to be fairly sophisticated in the types of rules that we allow users to specify when it comes to sharing their location, but the types of rules that different users will tend to specify tend to be very different as well. So it's one of those situations where you effectively need a meaningful number of settings to capture people's privacy policies, and on the surface at least, there's no good default policy that would do a good job at capturing what everyone wants to do, because no two people seem to have the same privacy preferences. And so part of our work in this space has been essentially to look at whether, beyond just coming up with a single policy that would work for everyone to start with, we could come up with what we call privacy personas, essentially small sets of default policies that we could expose to users, enabling them to pick the persona that works best for them, and then hopefully start from there in a way that would essentially alleviate the burden involved in potentially defining more complex policies up front. And so one of the questions has been to what extent these policies that we've been able to derive through new machine learning techniques that I'm not going to describe today actually work. How do they really work in practice when you expose these things to users? So in our prior work, we've certainly shown that it was possible in many of these examples, like location sharing, to identify a fairly small set of personas that seem to be doing a pretty good job at capturing people's privacy preferences. Effectively, with something like 3 or 4 different personas, it seemed that you could capture fairly well the types of preferences that a wide variety of people have. And so you would essentially expose these preferences to people, or these personas to people. People would look at them and say, oh, that's me, I'm persona number 3. And then they'd be pretty close to where they want it to be. They might want to further tweak things a little bit, but by and large, you would have saved them a meaningful amount of time. And so one of the open questions in this space is, to what extent does this really work, even though it works on paper? To what extent does this really work when you essentially deploy these technologies? How do users respond to these types of personas? Do they just stick with the personas that you expose to them? Do they end up tweaking them quite a bit? Do these personas make any difference 3-4 weeks down the road? Or does everyone eventually converge to the same policies? And so those are some of the questions that we've been asking ourselves more recently, and that's what I want to report on over the next few minutes. So just to give you a sense for what these types of personas look like, what you have here are examples of the personas that our machine learning techniques generate. These personas are constrained by our machine learning techniques to be understandable. So traditional machine learning, just to quick parenthesis here, traditional machine learning, for instance, clustering techniques, will obviously do a fairly decent job at essentially grouping users in different clusters. The challenge, however, is that the types of profiles that they would come up with, personas they would come up with, will tend to be very complex. They will tend to be very difficult for users to look at and comprehend and say, that's actually me. And so we've actually developed techniques that constrain the types of personas that you build so that you can actually look at them and say, hey, I understand what this will do to me, and I can actually go ahead and pick among these different personas.